The beginning, the most dangerous standard. In ancient Rome, people discovered something sharper than iron. They learned that beauty could rule more quietly than conquest. When Roman soldiers marched north, they found new faces, new shades of light in the hair and skin of the people they conquered. What began as curiosity became desire. From battlefields came trophies not made of gold, but of hair. The markets of Rome filled with bundles of blonde hair gathered from the defeated. Wives of senators and courtesans bought them to wear in the streets. Under the sun, they shimmered like captured sunlight. Some who could not afford the real thing made their own. They mixed ash, vinegar, and animal fat, burning their scalps for the illusion of light. Beauty became a quiet form of power. Each strand of hair told a story of distance and domination. It began as vanity, but soon it became a measure of worth. The pale color of the north turned into a Roman obsession, a mark of status that whispered of luxury, conquest, and control. The women who wore these wigs did not see blood, yet they carried war upon their heads. Every curl and braid was woven from history's quiet violence. In villas where marble glowed and fountains murmured, beauty became an empire within an empire. A woman's hair could decide her fate, her fortune, her survival. The city, with its 1,000 perfumes and 1,000 eyes, judged not by virtue or birth, but by the shimmer of gold upon the brow. The poets wrote of love, but even they knew desire was political. The higher the shade of light, the higher the place in the hierarchy of admiration. Those who could not be noble could still appear divine. In the baths of Rome, mirrors of polished bronze reflected this quiet tyranny. Women whispered recipes for potions that could bleach or burn. Slave girls, often from the same northern lands that birthed the fashion, stood behind their mistresses, brushing, braiding, oiling. Their hands knew both care and cruelty. The smell of singed hair mixed with rose oil, with wine, with the heavy air of summer. The sound of gossip drifted between marble pillars filled with envy, praise, and fear. To be beautiful was to be seen. To be seen was to be at risk. Under the calm surface of elegance, there was a silent struggle, the fear of fading, of darkening, of losing favor. Men ruled empires, but women ruled the mirrors, and through them ruled men in return. The standard grew more dangerous with each passing year. What began as imitation became transformation. Some women sought alchemists to create pastes that would lighten their hair to a northern shade. Others slept with their heads wrapped in cloth soaked in goat's milk, or soaked their locks in mixtures of ash and saffron. The city smelled faintly of smoke and metal, the scent of vanity mingling with labor. Even the statues began to change. Sculptors carved lighter curls into marble, as if the stone itself should reflect this new order of beauty. The gods were given hair like the Gauls. The myths were rewritten quietly to favor the pale over the dark. It was not a command, yet it moved through the city like a law. In the quiet hours of evening, when the heat faded and lamps were lit, the illusion continued. Behind closed doors, women removed their wigs, their false braids, their powdered perfumes, and stared into the mirrors that no longer told the truth. Some smiled, others wept. The face in the reflection was both theirs and not theirs. The price of beauty had never been written in coin alone. It was paid in hours, in pain, in quiet humiliation. Yet still, they returned to the ritual. Each morning, the same performance began anew. The empire demanded appearance as much as obedience. Far from the capital, in the provinces, whispers of this trend reached the conquered. Roman wives of local governors brought their wigs, their dyes, their powders. The native women watched, curious and resentful, wondering how something taken from them could be turned into a weapon against them. The Roman world expanded not only through legions but through imitation. To be Roman was to adopt its aesthetics, its scent, its surface. Beauty became diplomacy, a currency more persuasive than tribute. And so the color of a woman's hair could speak more powerfully than the words of an envoy. In time, the empire began to change from within. Generations passed, and what was once foreign became familiar. Children of mixed heritage carried both the darkness of the south and the light of the north. The rigid ideal began to blur, yet the desire for perfection did not fade. In every century, the same longing returned in new forms. Powdered wigs, golden dyes, elaborate headdresses. The materials changed, but the message remained. The illusion of light upon the head still whispered of control, of refinement, of being closer to the divine. What made it dangerous was not the beauty itself, but the silence surrounding it. No law had decreed that pale hair should be prized. No edict had forced women to burn their scalps, yet they did. It was the kind of power that worked without force, a quiet empire of imitation. The men who conquered the north did not realize that their victories would turn inward, reshaping their own city's soul. Rome, which had taken lands for wealth and glory, now took color for desire. The golden hair of the defeated became the crown of the conquerors. And perhaps that was the truest mark of empire, not the sword, but the mirror. In it, Rome saw not itself, but what it wished to be, brighter, rarer, untouchable. Beauty was its softest weapon and its most enduring. Long after the legions withdrew, after the stones of temples fell, the standard remained. The shimmer of light hair, the dream of refinement, the hunger to appear above one's nature. These outlasted marble, survived ashes, and drifted quietly into every age that followed. Even now, centuries later, the idea still lingers in the reflection of every mirror, in every culture that measures itself by illusion. The dangerous standard that began in Rome never truly died. It merely changed its name, its tools, its language. But the essence remains. The belief that beauty can be conquered, bought, or forged from pain. It is the most delicate empire ever built, and the most enduring. The empire of appearances still rules softly and invisibly, wherever light touches hair and the human heart listens to its reflection. The age of gold, fashion as conquest. Rome learned that style could speak louder than armies. A woman wearing the hair of a northern captive was more than a figure of elegance. She was proof of victory. To appear blonde was to appear closer to triumph. Poets wrote about it in verses both tender and cruel. Ovid admired the golden color, then warned that false beauty carried danger. Yet even those who warned were drawn to it. In the palace, Empress Pompeia Sabina became the image of this new light. Her hair, shining like polished brass, reflected the world around her. Every noblewoman followed her example. The city glowed with imitation. In that long reflection, beauty and danger became one and the same. The empire began to define itself through the softness of light rather than the edge of steel. Rome, once proud of its scars and its dust, began to worship surfaces. The rough calluses of soldiers, the grime of builders, the sweat of the forum, all these marks of labor were slowly hidden beneath powder and perfume. Fashion, once a sign of victory, became a form of conquest itself. The act of appearing magnificent was not only a matter of taste, but a declaration of control over chaos, of turning the raw world into something orderly, shining, and subdued. A woman's appearance could silence a room more effectively than a general's shout. The rhythm of Rome's ambition shifted. Its pulse, once measured by war drums, now beat in the quiet stroke of combs through perfumed hair, in the rustle of silk imported from the east, in the soft gleam of jewelry reflecting lamplight. The Age of Gold was not just a phrase, it was an illusion the empire built around itself. The golden hair of the empress became a symbol of divine favor, as if the gods themselves had crowned her with sunlight. Artists carved her likeness into marble, mosaic, and silver, spreading her image like scripture. Her hair was copied in wigs, in dyes, even in frescoes that lined the baths and villas of those who wished to bask in borrowed glory. It was not merely beauty, it was participation in power. To wear her color was to be seen as chosen, favored, civilized. The boundaries between worship and imitation blurred as the citizens of Rome began to worship their own reflections. Yet beneath the shimmer, the cost grew heavier. To maintain the illusion of perfection, an entire economy emerged. Merchants selling foreign dyes, slaves trained in the delicate art of hair bleaching, perfumers blending oils to mask the scent of burning. Blonde became an industry, and like all industries of empire, it relied on suffering. Young girls from conquered lands were taken not only for their beauty, but for the source of it. Their hair was cut, their heads shaved, their identity reduced to ornament. In Rome, the same hair would be washed, perfumed, and pinned into the coiffures of patrician women who never wondered whose crown they wore. The empire, so proud of its order, built its elegance upon quiet theft. Even men began to feel the pull of appearance. Senators tinted their hair with gold dust. Generals wore polished armor designed to catch the light rather than deflect arrows. Statues of emperors gleamed with gilt, as if divinity itself could be purchased from the mines of Spain. Rome had always sought permanence, but in the Age of Gold it sought reflection, an endless play of light upon the surface of things. The golden hue became a mask that covered decay, the illusion of eternal youth in a world already beginning to rot beneath its luxury. The philosopher Seneca, weary of the glittering facades, warned that Rome had mistaken wealth for virtue, light for truth. But his voice was a whisper against the tide. The city loved its own reflection too deeply to turn away. Fashion in those days was not mere vanity, it was language. A braid could signal status, a curl could mark allegiance. To appear in a certain style was to declare one's place in the silent hierarchy of admiration. The empress's hair set the pattern, and the empire followed. In the workshops near the Tiber, artisans toiled late into the night, crafting pins, ribbons, and nets of gold thread to hold the elaborate constructions together. Even slaves tasked with preparing these adornments were instructed in the art of arrangement, for a single misplaced strand could signify carelessness, a moral failing disguised as aesthetic error. Beauty became discipline, and discipline became beauty. At festivals, the streets glowed with this golden mania. Under the torchlight, hundreds of women moved like reflections of the same flame, their hair catching the air, their ornaments ringing softly as they passed. Rome had turned itself into a theatre, every citizen both actor and audience. The emperor himself encouraged it. He understood that appearance could rule where law could not. If his people worshipped beauty, they would remain too enchanted to question power. The empire dressed itself in radiance to hide the shadows gathering at its borders. Outside the marble heart of the capital, the provinces mirrored the transformation. Governors' wives in Gaul and Hispania began to import wigs and oils from the capital. Temples decorated their idols in the same pale hues. Even the mosaics on villa floors shimmered with gold leaf, as if to trap sunlight forever beneath the feet of their owners. The idea of Rome, the illusion of refinement and divine favor, spread faster than its legions could march. Conquest no longer required blood, it required admiration. To make others envy Rome was to make them obey it. And yet, within the silence of these rituals, unease began to grow. The dyes burned the scalp, the wigs itched, the gold pins cut into the skin. Beneath every perfect coiffure lay a wound. The pursuit of beauty turned into quiet suffering, endured with grace, hidden beneath smiles. It was said that the empress herself, in her later years, began to lose her hair from the constant bleaching and heat. But her portraits never showed this truth. The sculptors carved her with eternal curls, untouched by age or pain. Rome had learned to preserve illusion at any cost. The poets, ever drawn to contradiction, began to write of this new empire of mirrors. They spoke of light as both blessing and burden, of beauty as both shield and prison. In their verses, the golden hair became a symbol not of triumph, but of fragility, a fragile thread holding the weight of an empire's pride. "What is gold?" one poet wrote, "but the color of the sun before it sets." Yet even that melancholy truth could not dim the city's glow. The people continued to gild everything they touched, believing that light could hold back decay. By the time the old century waned, the age of gold had wrapped Rome in a strange calm. The clang of armor was softer, replaced by the whisper of silk and the hush of admiration. The empire no longer needed to expand to feel powerful. It needed only to be seen. The blonde hair that once marked conquest had become the empire's own reflection. Bright, fragile, endless. Rome had discovered that domination could be beautiful, and that beauty, once conquered, could dominate in return. When the fires of later centuries consumed its palaces and temples, the stones blackened, but the idea remained that to appear golden is to command. And somewhere, in the dust of all that marble and memory, a single strand of hair still glows faintly, catching the last light of an empire that once believed beauty could outlast time itself. The mirror turns. In the soft quiet of the Roman evening, when the last echoes of footsteps fade from marble courtyards and the lamps begin to glow with a low, steady light, the city turns inward. The air carries the faint scent of oils and warm stone, of the day slowly cooling against walls that have seen centuries of faces pass by. Inside the villas, mirrors rest upon tables polished smooth by countless hands. The world beyond the glass seems still, but within each reflection, Rome continues its gentle performance. The women have long taken on the color of conquest, their hair touched by the pale golds of distant lands, the shades gathered through trade, craft, and imitation. Now the men follow. In the calm rhythm of their routines, senators and scholars sit beneath the lamplight, their attendants carefully mixing powders, pastes, and dyes. The air hums faintly with the quiet crackle of burning oils. Heads once greyed by time are turned copper bright again. It is not vanity in the loud sense, not pride or challenge, but a simple continuation of the city's long conversation with light. They polish, rinse, and dry. They stand before the mirror as if confirming that they still belong to the slow, unending pageant of beauty that Rome has built for itself. Beneath the soft flicker of torches, their faces glow, calm and composed, each one echoing the same desire. not to change the world, but to remain part of its surface. Across the city, in bathhouses filled with steam, the same gentle rituals unfold. The sound of water drips from marble basins. The whisper of cloth against skin blends with low murmurs of conversation. The air smells of rose oil, of crushed herbs, and of the faint tang of something burnt. The trace of chemicals used to lighten hair, to smooth skin, to polish what time has dulled. The mirrors in these places are clouded by vapor, the reflections soft and wavering. Faces appear and fade, glimmer and dissolve, like thoughts half remembered. In this mist, no one seeks perfection, they only follow the quiet rhythm of care. Hands move slowly, applying oils, rinsing, wrapping, waiting. The noise of the city outside is distant, almost forgotten. What remains is the sound of breath, the slow exhale of people tending to the image they share with the world. Each movement, though small, becomes part of a larger calm, a ritual repeated through generations, where the act of looking at oneself becomes not pride, but maintenance, a way to keep the familiar intact. Over time, the mirror itself becomes something more than an object. It holds the weight of habit, the patience of reflection. In the still surface of polished metal or glass, men and women meet not only their own gaze, but the long echo of others who once stood the same way. They adjust a strand of hair, trace the curve of a cheek, smooth the fabric along a shoulder. It is not a search for youth in the desperate sense, but a quiet acceptance that time too can be arranged, softened, made to move more gently. The mirror becomes a companion, a silent listener that records the city's slow transformations. It reflects not vanity but endurance, not change but persistence. The act of seeing oneself becomes a form of calm, a brief moment when the world seems ordered, symmetrical, whole. Outside, the city hums. Carts roll over stone, fountains murmur, lamps flicker in the windows. But within the stillness of that small reflection, there is peace. As seasons turn and years pass, what once marked victory becomes fashion, and what was fashion quietly settles into identity. The colors that once spoke of conquest now speak of belonging. The light shades of hair and the smooth gleam of skin no longer remind anyone of the battles that brought them here. They have become part of the landscape, as natural as the marble columns or the rippling of fabric in a summer breeze. Rome no longer remembers where the shades came from. It only remembers that they are beautiful. In this forgetting, the empire finds a kind of rest. The rituals of care continue not from desire, but from habit. Each morning, people rise, bathe, and look once more into the mirror. The reflection has changed little, perhaps only in small ways. A new wrinkle softened by oil, a line of grey turned to gold. But beneath it all, the same calm rhythm endures. The mirror turns, the city breathes, and life continues, steady and unhurried. Under the calm hum of Rome at night, when torches burn low and the air is cool against the stone, the reflections blur and fade. The people sleep behind heavy curtains, their perfumes lingering in the air, their mirrors catching the faintest shimmer of moonlight before dimming into shadow. Outside, the streets grow still. Only the fountains keep their motion, whispering softly into the silence. The empire, in its quiet vastness, rests not in its power but in its repetition, in the endless turning of small gestures, the brushing of hair, the smoothing of cloth, the polishing of bronze. The mirror turns once more, as it always does, reflecting the gentle persistence of a world that no longer strives to conquer, but simply to remain. Beneath its surface, Rome is calm, its beauty unspoken, its light softened to the color of sleep. The city exhales and time folds softly around it, carrying the faint glow of all those who once looked upon themselves and found, in their reflection, the stillness of eternity. The commerce of hair and the fading light. In the slow rhythm of the empire, a quiet trade began to move across the seas. It was not declared with ceremony, nor marked upon any tablet of record, yet it reached every shore touched by Roman ships. The ports of Gaul, the harbours of Britannia, the river mouths of the Rhine and Danube, all sent forth the same small cargo, sacks of hair, soft and strange, gathered from lands where the wind was sharp and the sun weak. The sailors who carried them knew the value of their freight, though it was light enough to lift with one arm. Each sack was tied with rope, sealed with wax against salt and air. When the ships reached the Italian coast, the bundles were unloaded before dawn. They passed from ship to cart, from cart to courtyard, through streets that still glistened with dew. In shaded workshops behind the busy markets, the transformation began. There, under tiled roofs and quiet arches, the hair was sorted, cleaned and perfumed. Young women worked beside older hands, each movement practiced and slow. Bowls of water steamed faintly on low tables, brushes lay drying on the sills. The scent of soap mingled with herbs, thyme, myrtle, crushed lavender. As the hours passed, the strands changed from coarse to shining, from tangled to smooth. They were hung across wooden beams to dry in sunlight that fell like gold through the lattice. When the day grew too hot, the workers drew curtains of linen across the openings, letting the air cool the room. Every motion was measured, patient, and precise. The sound of combs and scissors was soft, almost soothing, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. Each strand was then weighed and coiled, wrapped in silk, tied with a thread of red. Merchants entered the room in sandals that clicked lightly upon the stone floor. They spoke little, gesturing to the scales, to the parchment ledgers, to the sacks waiting by the door. Coins passed from hand to hand with a quiet ring. The work was business, but it felt almost ritual, a ceremony of calm exchange. When the merchants left, their carts moved slowly through the streets toward the markets of perfume and colour, where women gathered to inspect, to compare, to choose. There was no rush, no argument, only the gentle hum of commerce in its familiar rhythm. Across the city, beauty had become a craft of patience. The perfumers opened their shutters each morning, their shelves lined with jars of oil and powder. Women came wrapped in light veils, their voices low as they discussed shade and texture. The assistants held strands to the light, letting them shimmer like thin rivers of sunlight. Some customers selected the palest tones, others preferred darker golds touched with bronze. Each purchase carried its own quiet story, a wish for youth, for refinement, for belonging to the great, unspoken pattern of Rome's appearance. The price of a fine wig could equal a year's labour for a craftsman, yet the trade continued without pause. There was no persuasion needed, for the desire was already woven into daily life. To wear hair gathered from distant lands was to wear the empire itself, its reach, its curiosity, its memory of conquest softened into beauty. In shaded arcades, merchants displayed their goods upon polished marble tables. Strands of hair coiled neatly beside small jars of ointment, brushes carved from ivory, and bottles of rosewater sealed with wax. Customers moved between them with the slow grace of ritual. The exchange was almost silent, the language of gestures replacing speech. A merchant's bow, a woman's nod, the gleam of a coin. Together they formed a quiet performance that played out each day beneath the steady light of the Roman sun. The trade grew vast, invisible, and self-sustaining. It reached the villas of senators and the houses of perfumers. It touched the baths, the theatres, the banquets. What began as a mark of conquest had turned into a rhythm of maintenance, an empire preserving its reflection. The work of sailors, traders, cleaners, artisans, and merchants formed a living chain that connected distant shores to marble halls. In this chain, every hand mattered, every gesture contributed to the image that Rome held of itself. Each strand of hair became part of a larger design, a texture of patience, endurance, and craft. In time, the trade became so natural that no one thought to question its origin. The heads from which the hair had come were forgotten. The stories of the people who once carried it faded into myth. Only the material remained, fragrant, gleaming, soft under torchlight. The wigs were displayed on carved wooden stands, brushed each evening, adjusted each morning. They adorned noble women at banquets, courtesans in the streets, and performers upon the stage. At dawn, before the city woke, servants aired them in open courtyards, letting the early light touch them. The strands swayed gently in the breeze, catching the glow of the rising sun. The wigs became symbols not of conquest but of care. They reflected a city that sought to preserve its appearance of perfection, a city that had learned to turn its victories into quiet ornament. Rome wore its past with composure, the trophies of expansion softened into artifice, the sharp edges of history polished into texture and light. The commerce of hair became part of the empire's breath, joining the sound of fountains and footsteps, the turning of markets, the whisper of fabrics in narrow halls. It was not celebrated nor condemned, it simply was, as steady as the passing of days. Even as the years slipped by, the trade did not fade. Ships still departed from northern ports, carrying new bundles sealed in wax. Workshops still opened their shutters to the morning air. The tools grew smoother with use, the mirrors brighter, the methods more refined. Each generation repeated the gestures of the one before, not from greed, but from habit, from the quiet satisfaction of continuity. The rhythm was circular, unbroken, ships departing, ships returning, hair gathered, washed, sold, and worn again. In that circle, time itself seemed to settle into calm. Beneath this stillness, something subtle changed. The empire no longer sought new lands, it sought reflection. Its desire for beauty had replaced its hunger for territory. The mirror had become its map. Within the flicker of torches and the quiet murmur of the markets, Rome's grandeur found a gentler form. Power was now measured in texture, in shade, in the delicate sheen of hair that caught the light just so. The world of conquest had transformed into the world of care, and that care carried the empire into a different kind of immortality, one made not of stone or steel, but of patience and repetition. As night descended, the hum of the city softened. The workers folded their cloths, covered their basins, and set aside their tools. The merchants counted coins in the half-light, the scent of oil lamps mixing with the faint sweetness of perfume. Outside, the streets were lined with silence. Water flowed gently through the fountains, catching the moonlight in ripples. Somewhere in the distance, a cart creaked as it moved toward the port, another shipment ready for the next voyage. The commerce of hair, gentle and endless, breathed in rhythm with the empire itself. In the narrow lanes behind the great avenues, another kind of reflection took shape. The night deepened with the scent of wine and smoke. Behind the doors of small houses, women sat before mirrors, brushing and dyeing, preparing for the hours to come. Their laughter was low, their gestures slow. They dyed their hair to the same pale shades that gleamed in the palaces above, gold touched with copper, sunlight turned soft. The air was filled with the mingled aroma of vinegar, ash, perfume, and rose. What once belonged to the high halls now lived in the alleys. The city's palette had spread itself across every boundary. The same hue that had crowned the empress now appeared in the reflections of tavern mirrors, in the eyes of dancers, in the curls of courtesans leaning against shadowed walls. The dye sellers stayed awake long after midnight, their tables lined with bowls of pigment, each catching a small circle of lamplight. Hands reached out, rich and poor alike, mixing color, sharing brushes, waiting for the strands to change. Beauty had become common, but not lesser. It had simply softened into the texture of ordinary life. Rome, in its imitation of itself, began to blur. The differences between the noble and the humble grew faint. A senator's wife and a servant's daughter might share the same shade of hair, the same scent of rose and oil. The empire, once marked by distance and hierarchy, now seemed to fold inward, reflecting itself endlessly. Its symbols, once clear and grand, turned quiet, like echoes fading through marble halls. And yet, in this quiet erosion, there was a strange peace. Under the torches, the city glowed as if washed by one continuous light. The people moved like shadows of the same form, the artisan cleaning his hands in the fountain, the merchant locking his stall, the woman adjusting her reflection in bronze. The golden tones shimmered softly, uniting them in the calm of repetition. Rome, mirroring itself, seemed to drift toward stillness, its grandeur transformed into habit. By then, everyone understood, though none would say it aloud. What is most desired often begins to fade, not in ruin, but in familiarity. The color that once declared victory now rested in quiet routine. In the soft hours before dawn, when the torches burned low and wind moved through the alleys, the dyed hair shimmered faintly beneath the stars. The city inhaled, exhaled, and continued, its beauty no longer loud, but enduring, absorbed into the slow breath of its own reflection. The mirror of Rome no longer distinguished between origin and imitation, between triumph and care. The commerce of hair had become something more than trade. It was the empire's own rhythm, its silent heartbeat, the steady turning of ships, of hands, of time itself. Beneath that rhythm, history lay sleeping, and the light upon the strands, gold, copper, pale, remained, suspended as if unwilling to vanish. The city rested within its glow, calm and eternal, its power softened to silence, its reflection drifting slowly into the long, unbroken sleep of the world. The sacred shade of gold. In time, the fascination with golden hair spread beyond the living. The painters and sculptors of Rome followed the same quiet current, shaping their art to match the shifting ideals of beauty. In shaded studios lit by narrow windows, they worked with patience that mirrored the rhythm of the empire itself. Blocks of marble waited in still corners. Brushes rested in jars of cloudy water. From dawn until dusk, the air was filled with the faint scent of pigment and stone dust, with the sound of soft scraping, of bristles against plaster, of a world being recolored in silence. Marble heads, once left white as snow, began to take on new warmth. The artists tinted them with faint washes of yellow, blending beeswax with crushed ochre to mimic the shimmer of sunlit hair. Statues that had worn dark curls for centuries were remade to match the fashion of Rome. The gods of Greece and the heroes of old, once imagined with the hues of their homeland, now reflected the tones of an empire that measured grace in gold. The transformation was delicate, almost invisible, a quiet shift of light rather than shape. When the sun struck these faces, the pale marbles seemed to breathe, glowing faintly as though it remembered the warmth of the human body. In the great villas, these figures stood along the halls, their golden heads shining beneath the lamplight. The soft colour changed with the hour, pale and cool at dawn, warm and deep at sunset. Visitors walked past them in silence, their sandals whispering across the floor. Few spoke of the change, for it felt natural, as if the statues themselves had chosen to age into this new beauty. The empire had always absorbed what it admired. Now, even its art bore the quiet reflection of its people. Painters followed the same path. In their frescoes, they began to lighten the hair of goddesses and muses to soften the shadows around their faces. The walls of temples and private rooms glowed with shades of amber and honey. In portraits of noble families, the same color appeared again and again, the pale gold that had come to mean refinement, elegance, and something beyond the reach of time. The color moved like light through water, changing everything it touched. It became a symbol not only of beauty, but of control, of calm, of harmony between art and life. Even the idea of purity began to change color. Where once it had been imagined as marble white or deep bronze, now it shimmered faintly with a yellow tone, a reflection of sunlight captured in stone and skin. To be golden was to appear touched by something divine, yet still human enough to be admired. The painters spoke of it quietly, in the way craftsmen speak of balance and tone. Too much color, and the image lost its calm. Too little, and the light seemed cold. But when the right shade was found, when the gold blended with the pale beneath it, the figure seemed alive, not with passion, but with quiet grace. The sacred shade of gold became the empire's visual breath. It appeared in mosaics, in jewelry, in fabrics woven for ceremonies. Threads of golden fiber were sewn into tunics. Oils mixed with fine dust were brushed upon the skin before festivals. The same tone linked art, attire, and memory, blurring the line between what was real and what was represented. To walk through the city at sunset was to see gold reflected everywhere, in the river, in the tiles, in the faces of statues that watched in stillness. The color became a language of belonging, gentle yet persistent, shared by emperors and artisans alike. In the workshops, apprentices learned to mix the golden hue with reverence. They crushed minerals with slow precision, adding drops of oil until the pigment gleamed like liquid sunlight. Masters watched in silence, correcting only the smallest gestures, the angle of a brush, the weight of a hand. The process demanded calm, for the gold responded not to haste, but to patience. When the color was finally applied to marble or plaster, it did not shout or shine too brightly. It simply rested upon the surface, waiting for the light to move. Visitors who entered these studios felt the stillness. Dust floated in the air, catching the afternoon glow. The statues, with their golden tinted hair, seemed almost to breathe. Some were unfinished, their faces half-shadowed, their curls only half-gilded. But even so, they held a quiet serenity, as if the empire's ideal of beauty had paused to consider itself. The artists did not speak of divinity nor of power. They spoke of proportion, of tone, of the way a line of color could suggest a thought. The sacredness lay not in worship, but in the care of the hand that shaped the light. As the years passed, the shade of gold became more than fashion. It was memory, distilled and preserved. The city grew older, its monuments weathered by rain, its marble softened by touch. Yet beneath the dust the faint golden hue endured. In broken statues, in fragments of fresco, in the mosaics buried beneath the earth, the light still lingered, gentle, patient, unending. The empire itself would one day fade, but this quiet color, this reflection of sunlight upon stone, would remain as its calmest voice. In that soft persistence, the sacred shade of gold found its true meaning. It was not the color of triumph or glory, but of endurance, the warmth that survives long after sound and movement have ceased. When the last workshop closed its doors and the lamps burned low, the gold upon the statues still caught the final light. It glowed not for the eyes of the living, but for the memory of hands that once shaped it, for the breath of an age that sought beauty not in noise, but in stillness. The empire, like its art, had learned that even light could become patient. And in that patience, Rome found a form of eternity, not carved in power, but brushed softly in the color of sleep. The Empire of Light. Whether real or false no longer mattered. The distinction had quietly dissolved, like a shadow absorbed by light. The color itself had become a language, and the empire spoke it fluently. In palaces and markets alike, in the corridors of marble and the narrow streets lined with plaster and dust, the same golden shimmer passed from one life to another. It moved not through decree or law, but through imitation, through the soft persistence of habit, through the wish to be seen in the same light. Rome no longer conquered with armies, but with appearances. Its reflection had become its truest form of power. Women whispered of how sunlight stayed in their hair after long days, as though the city itself had learned to trap daylight within its walls. When evening came, they would sit by open windows, brushing their hair slowly, watching the strands catch the faint glow of the dying sun. The movement was simple: brush, breathe, repeat. Yet it carried the rhythm of the empire's quiet endurance. Servants brought small mirrors polished smooth as water, and the reflection seemed endless, gold upon gold, fading into dusk. The city, bathed in warm tones, appeared to glow from within, as though its very stones had absorbed the daylight and refused to let it go. Artisans began to notice the same hue in unexpected places, in mosaics in glass, in the surface of bronze warmed by touch. The tone that once belonged to hair and ornament now colored the world itself. Painters mixed new shades of ochre and honey. Sculptors tinted their statues to match the soft light of dawn. Even the frescoes in the baths glowed faintly, as if the air itself had taken on the empire's chosen color. Rome had found its reflection not only in mirrors, but in matter, in dust, in pigment, in the sunlit haze that drifted through every courtyard. In this golden calm, beauty no longer belonged to anyone in particular. It had spread too far, too evenly, to remain a possession. The noblewoman in her atrium, the merchant's daughter at her window, the servant carrying jugs of water, all moved through the same shimmer. They did not think of it as imitation or artifice. It had become part of the natural order. The color did not divide, it connected, weaving through the empire like a breath shared by millions. The streets themselves seemed softer for it. The afternoon light lingered longer. Even the sound of footsteps felt muted beneath its glow. Rome had turned beauty into an empire within an empire, silent, persuasive, and self-sustaining. No monument could rival it, for it existed everywhere, invisible yet unmistakable. It lived in gesture, in reflection, in the way people turned their faces toward the light at dusk. The true art of the city was not in marble or bronze, but in the harmony of its illusions. A civilization teaching itself to find permanence in appearance. The empire of conquest had slowly transformed into an empire of tone and texture, ruled not by generals or laws, but by the quiet authority of beauty. Visitors from distant lands often spoke of the glow that seemed to rise from the streets themselves. They wrote of it in scrolls and letters, of how Rome's light felt different, not brighter, but steadier, as if it came from beneath the surface rather than above it. They did not know that the color was both real and imagined, drawn from dye and from desire alike. It was not the sunlight they saw, but the reflection of a culture that had learned to make its own. By night, the illusion deepened. Torches flickered along the colonnades, and the golden hues came alive in their wavering light. Faces appeared softer, garments shimmered faintly, hair caught the glow as if remembering the day. The city seemed to dream itself back into being each evening, its reflections multiplying across still fountains and polished metal. Every corner carried some trace of the same warmth, in the surface of a goblet, in the curve of a statue, in the faint sheen on the water that flowed beneath bridges. Rome had woven itself into light. And in that light, time moved differently. The boundaries between real and false, between what was crafted and what was natural, had lost meaning. The golden color was no longer dye, nor art, nor ornament. It was atmosphere. It hovered over the empire like a second sun, unseen yet felt, softening all that it touched. The people lived within it as fish live within water, unthinking, unknowing, breathing beauty without question. What had once been fashion was now the air itself. As the centuries turned, the city aged, but the hue endured. The marble yellowed, the bronze dimmed, the mosaics cracked. Yet in the evening light, everything still seemed to glow. Travelers described it as a city that refused to fade, a place where even ruin appeared radiant. The color, though born of the imitation, had become truth. It no longer needed mirrors or dyes. It lived in the memory of the eye. To see Rome was to see light that lingered beyond its source, to feel warmth that outlasted touch. In this quiet persistence, the empire found its final form. Not the empire of conquest, nor of law, but the empire of reflection, one that conquered softly through the comfort of familiarity. The people no longer remembered when the color began, nor cared whether it was true. They lived within its calm embrace, their days marked by the slow passage of sunlight across golden walls. When night came, the city glowed faintly still, as if lit from within by the residue of centuries. And so, whether real or false, no longer mattered. The color had become Rome's language, and in speaking it, the empire taught the world how to endure, not through strength, but through the quiet illusion of beauty that refuses to fade. In that golden stillness, the city continued to breathe, shimmering softly against the edge of time, radiant, patient, eternal. The fading light. Centuries passed. The quiet rhythm that had once carried the empire began to slow. The seas that had shimmered with sails now darkened with distance. The wind still moved, but fewer ships answered its call. Wars multiplied across the borders, the frontiers stretching thin like cloth worn by time. The old trade routes, once alive with voices and the creak of wagons, began to fall silent. Markets that had once overflowed with foreign wares now waited in stillness. The empire, vast and weary, trembled softly beneath the weight of its own design. The commerce of beauty faded with the roots that sustained it. The blonde hair of the north, once gathered in sacks, shipped in silence, perfumed, and displayed in the glowing heart of Rome, no longer reached the southern ports. The ships that had carried it now returned half empty, their hulls echoing with emptiness. The air of the city, once scented with oils and burning herbs, grew faint. Mirrors reflected faces that seemed less bright, less certain. the golden light that had colored Rome's reflection began to dim, not through loss, but through the slow, natural surrender of habit. Without its northern reflection, the city turned its gaze elsewhere. New shades came into favor, darker, deeper, heavier with scent. Traders from the east brought vials of thick, fragrant oil, their scents heavy with amber and smoke. The tones of beauty shifted. Hair dyed black or chestnut gleamed under lamplight like polished wood. The pale brightness that had once defined refinement was replaced by warmth, by shadow, by quiet depth. The color of the empire's desire had changed, but the longing remained the same. Rome still sought its reflection, not in conquest, nor imitation, but in adaptation, in the constant reshaping of itself. Artists followed the shift without protest. In the workshops, the jars of golden pigment were set aside. In their place came richer hues, iron oxides, red earths, bitumen, and soot. The frescoes deepened in tone, their goddesses now painted with darker hair, their light replaced by a calm dusk. Sculptors left marble untinted, preferring the stone's natural shadow. Painters in small rooms near the river painted portraits that glowed not with gold, but with the quiet depth of brown and black. The figures seemed to retreat slightly from the light, their beauty turning inward, their stillness more human. In the markets, mirrors still lined the walls, though their reflections seemed softer, hazier. The women who once sought to catch the sun in their hair now brushed in oils from the east, thick, slow, fragrant. The scent lingered in the air long after they had gone, warm as smoke, sweet as dried fruit. In the bathhouses, the steam smelled of resin and myrrh. The sound of combs scraping through wet hair replaced the once familiar hiss of bleaching mixtures. There was no sharpness, no vinegar or ash, only the slow gleam of dark strands under the torchlight. Rome had found new comfort in shadow. This new beauty felt closer to the night than the day. It was less about conquest, more about endurance. The pale tones that had once spoken of distance and dominance gave way to a calm, steady depth. A beauty that did not seek to shine, but to last. The empire's people, though changed, continued the same quiet rituals. They combed, they polished, they perfumed. The mirror still stood at the center of every room, though the image within it now seemed gentler, slower, as if the city itself were learning to rest. The transformation did not happen in a single year or even a single generation. It crept through the centuries as softly as dust. One style dissolved into another, one reflection blending with the next. The young copied the old without realizing it, and the old watched the young with quiet recognition. In the temples and villas, the statues of the Golden Age remained, their pale hair faint beneath layers of time, while beside them new works appeared, carved in darker tones, their features softened, their eyes lowered. The two eras stood together, neither replacing the other, both waiting in the same still air. Even as borders shifted and provinces fell away, the rhythm of daily beauty endured. Ships still came, though from nearer shores. Merchants still sold their oils, though in smaller quantities. The barbers still lit their lamps at dawn, their scissors clicking softly in the same rhythm as before. Rome, even in decline, preserved the gestures that had once defined it, the brushing of hair, the smoothing of skin, the adjustment of fabric before the mirror. The empire continued to imitate itself, not out of vanity, but out of memory. And beneath this quiet persistence, something tender remained. The city no longer glittered with the gold of conquest, but it glowed with a softer light, the light of endurance. Beauty had outlasted victory. It no longer needed the trophies of faraway lands or the trade of distant seas. It lived in the calm repetition of care. The dye, the oil, the touch, all had become part of the same slow music that carried the empire toward its twilight. When the last shipments from the north ceased entirely, no one wept. The city had already changed. The blonde curls that once adorned its statues and courtyards were now memories, faint and brittle as sunlight on old stone. In their place came shadows, rich, layered, full of calm. The Golden Age had not vanished. It had merely grown quiet, sinking gently into the darker tones of time. And so Rome continued. Dimmer, slower, yet somehow more at peace. The empire that once measured its beauty by the brightness of its reflection now found it in the stillness of its shadows. The longing remained, but it had softened, settling into the rhythm of breath and memory. The light that once defined the world's greatest city did not vanish. It simply changed color, from gold to amber, from amber to dusk, until it became the tender glow of endurance itself. The sleeping light. The empire searched for beauty the way it once searched for land. The same patience, the same hunger for continuity guided its gaze. In the early centuries, it had crossed seas and mountains in search of new borders. Now it looked inward, seeking the quiet persistence of grace. The armies that once carried banners now carried brushes and chisels. The work of conquest had turned to the work of preservation. Where once soldiers marched, artisans knelt, in temples, in crumbling villas, in the half-light of forgotten halls, tracing with care the fading edges of color that time had left behind. When the old colors faded from the streets, they did not vanish completely. They lingered in the walls, beneath layers of dust and plaster, in the corners where sunlight could not reach. The mosaics still held their glimmer, though dimmed and cracked. The frescoes, though worn, still whispered of soft blues, of gentle golds. The pigments that had once covered entire palaces now existed only as faint memory, as the echo of a touch. But even as the city aged, these remnants endured, quiet, uncomplaining, alive in their stillness. The marble, too, remembered. Beneath its pale surface, faint outlines of color remained, the blush of a cheek, the glint of hair, the trace of gilding that once caught the light. The painters who still walked the streets noticed these ghosts of color. They would pause before a statue or a ruined wall, tracing the air with their fingers as if following an invisible line. Some carried small tablets of wax on which they recorded shades they could barely see. Grey gold, ash rose, the color of fading sunlight through smoke. They mixed new pigments to match them, not to restore, but to remember. Their work was no longer to create beauty, but to guard its echo. The light did not disappear. It simply sank, like embers beneath ash, still warm, still breathing, waiting for another age to awaken it. In the still hours before dawn, when the city slept, that hidden glow seemed to stir. It was not seen, only felt. A faint awareness beneath the stone, a quiet presence in the walls. The lamps burned low in workshops, and the air shimmered faintly with the memory of gold. Dust drifted through the light like fine mist, carrying the last reflections of centuries. Even in decline, the empire continued to reflect upon itself. Beauty was no longer an act of display, but of remembrance. The walls that had once blazed with color now spoke in whispers. Mosaics gleamed softly in the baths, the tiny pieces of glass catching the last sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the roof. Each piece was small, almost nothing on its own, Yet together they formed an image that outlasted voices and kings. The city, in its fading, learned the art of subtle endurance. Travelers who arrived in the later centuries wrote of this strange calm, a city half lit, half asleep, its splendor hidden beneath layers of age. They found beauty not in what was new, but in what persisted, a single streak of gold on a crumbling column, the worn shimmer of pigment on a statue's hair, a fragment of wall that still held the faint scent of paint. These became the empire's treasures. Rome had ceased to build outward, it had begun to build inward, to find greatness in what remained rather than what was gained. The craftsmen of the final generation understood this deeply. Their tools grew smaller, their movements slower. They no longer sought perfection, but preservation. They worked to keep the last traces alive, a glint of color beneath marble dust, a curve of brightness hidden under shadow. In their silence, they carried the same reverence their ancestors had shown on battlefields, though now the struggle was not against enemies, but against time itself. And yet, there was peace in this surrender. The empire, in searching for beauty, had finally found rest. The light that once blazed in torches and crowns now glowed from within its ruins. Gentle, hidden, eternal. The color had changed, softened, and scattered, but its spirit endured. It waited, patient as the earth, for another hand to uncover it, another mind to remember what had once been light. In this way, beauty outlived empire. The gold that once adorned the heads of nobles, the marble that once shone in the courts of power, the frescoes that once filled entire rooms with brightness, all faded, yet all remained. Time could not erase them, it could only bury them in layers of quiet. The embers of beauty lay beneath the ashes of history, untouched and breathing. Centuries later, they would awaken again, in the eyes of those who brushed away the dust, in the light of scholars' lamps, in the restoration of color that still trembles within forgotten stone. For now, though, the city slept. The fountains murmured in the darkness, the air heavy with the scent of rain and dust. Beneath the streets, in sealed chambers and buried halls, the light waited. It did not flicker or fade, it rested, patient as memory, glowing faintly beneath the centuries. Rome's beauty, though dimmed, had not died. It had only learned to dream, quietly, endlessly, beneath the weight of time. The blue people of the north. Far beyond the reach of Rome, past the forests and the wide rivers, beyond the last outposts of the empire's paved roads, there stretched a land of wind and mist. The light there was softer, slower, filtered through endless clouds that moved like breath over the hills. In this quiet expanse lived the northern tribes, people of cold air, of open sky, of long silence. They did not build cities of stone, nor temples of marble. Their world was made of earth and water, of fog that clung to their hair, of fires that flickered low against the wind. They were known to the Romans as Celts, though among themselves they carried many names, passed in whispers through generations. Before battle, these people performed a ritual that even Rome, in all its curiosity, could never truly understand. They painted their bodies in blue, not for ornament, nor for vanity, but as part of their rhythm of being. The pigment came from the woad plant, its leaves crushed, fermented, and mixed with ash and animal fat until it became a thick, fragrant paste. The process took time and patience. Leaves were gathered at dawn when the dew still clung to them. The mixture was stirred in clay bowls and left in the shade for days. When the color deepened to the shade of deep water, the tribe knew it was ready. they smeared it across their skin in quiet ceremony. Mothers painted their sons, warriors painted one another, elders traced spirals and lines across chests and arms. The blue cooled the body, sealed the pores, steadied the pulse. Under the chill of the northern air, it gave warmth in its own strange way, not of fire, but of calm. The marks were more than decoration. They were language, belonging, continuity. Each line told a story, of family, of land, of seasons turning. To paint the body was to remember the world, to wear the earth itself as a second skin. When the mist rose from the valleys, the blue seemed to move. Under the low grey sky, their painted bodies merged with the air, neither entirely human nor entirely sky. From a distance, they appeared like shadows carved from wind, silent figures moving through fog. Roman soldiers who saw them spoke of ghosts, of spirits of water and stone. They said the colour shimmered faintly before a charge, as if the earth itself had risen to defend its own. But to the tribes there was no magic in it, only tradition, only patience. The woad was their connection to the land, its roots their roots, its colour their calm before the storm. At night, when no battle called and no horn sounded, the pigment still glowed faintly under the firelight. The blue on their skin turned darker, reflecting the flames like metal beneath water. Around the fires they sang in low voices, songs that rose and fell like the wind. Children listened, tracing the painted lines on their arms, learning which spiral meant river, which meant sky. The scent of woad and smoke mingled with the smell of earth and rain. It was not beauty they sought in the blue, but balance, a quiet between breath and silence. When morning came, the fog lay heavy on the moors. The warriors stood at the edge of the mist, the paint cool against their skin. Their faces were calm, their movements measured. They carried no mirrors, no ornaments, only the colour that tied them to the soil beneath their feet. The Romans, when they first met them in battle, saw not savagery but unity. An entire people painted in the same hue, their bodies breathing the same light. To the empire, this colour was strange, alien. To those who wore it, it was home. Over time, the legend grew. Travellers who returned south spoke of the blue people of the north, whose bodies shone like the horizon and whose courage seemed born of air itself. Artists in Rome tried to imagine them, painting scenes of azure warriors wrapped in fog. Poets described them as living fragments of the sky. But distance always softened truth. The real blue was not brilliance, not brightness, but stillness, a colour that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. It was the hue of cold rivers, of twilight, of breath in winter. It was the colour of endurance. The Celts themselves did not see the blue as a symbol of power. It was simply part of their rhythm, like the beating of drums or the lighting of fires at dusk. When the battles were over, the paint would fade. Rain would wash it away, leaving faint stains along the arms and shoulders, the traces of the ritual still visible in pale patterns. They did not mourn the loss. To fade was natural, just as the sky faded into night, just as seasons turned. The next morning, they would gather new leaves, crush them again, begin anew. In this quiet repetition, their world found harmony. The act of painting became a meditation, a bridge between day and night, body and earth. The blue cooled the skin, calmed the heart, and made each person part of something larger, the land itself, breathing through them. It was not a shield, not a charm, but a reminder that every life, no matter how brief, belonged to the same rhythm of soil and wind. And when centuries later the empire that once feared them had long since faded into ruin, the memory of the blue remained. Fragments of pottery still carried traces of the pigment. Buried bones still showed the faintest stains of color. The stories survived in quiet ways, in the names of rivers, in the tint of ancient fabrics, in the songs of northern hills. The Romans had recorded them as enemies, but time remembered them differently, as the people who carried the sky upon their skin. The empire that once measured the world by gold and marble never understood that beyond its borders another kind of beauty endured, colder, simpler, and infinitely patient. While Rome's color sank beneath centuries of dust, the blue of the north drifted on the wind, unchanged. It was not the color of conquest, but of belonging. It spoke not of victory, but of breath. And though the empire's light dimmed, somewhere in the mist of forgotten lands that calm shade still lingered, cool, endless, and eternal as the sky itself. The weavers of color. Their clothing was woven from wool dyed in reds, greens, and yellows, colors drawn not from distant trade, but from the soil and plants around them. Each shade carried a story. The red came from roots crushed at dawn, the green from leaves boiled with moss and copper, the yellow from flowers that opened only under the gentlest sun. The women of the northern tribes knew these secrets by heart. Their hands moved in patient rhythm, washing, twisting, weaving. Smoke curled above their huts, carrying the faint scent of wet wool and dye, of wood ash and rain. Outside, the wind brushed over the moors, cold and endless, while within, the looms sang quietly, threads clicking together like heartbeat and breath. The patterns they made crossed like rivers, bright yet calm. No two cloaks were ever the same, yet all belonged to the same language of form. Lines curved like water around stones, spirals wound like tides returning to shore, checks and bands mirrored the fields divided by stone fences and streams. In every thread lay an echo of the world around them, of hills rising and falling in the distance, of clouds gathering in slow motion above the heather, of sunlight that broke briefly through and then vanished again. Their designs were not made to impress or to mark status. They were maps of memory, quiet expressions of a land understood by touch. To them, color was not luxury. It was a sign of belonging, proof that the world still spoke to them, and they still answered. In the long winters, when the sky remained grey for months and the wind howled through the valleys, the colours within their cloaks became warmth itself. They wore the earth against their skin, carrying its tones wherever they went. The reds recalled the hearths that burned through the night, the greens the moss along the streams, the yellows the rare light of morning sun. Wrapped in these colours, they did not feel the emptiness of the horizon. They felt the nearness of the world that had made them. When they walked across the fields, their woven cloaks moved like slow waves under the wind. Seen from afar, their figures carried the landscape upon their shoulders, small, moving fragments of the earth's own palette. The bright wool did not fight against the grey sky, it balanced it. The colours did not shine, but breathed softly, alive yet subdued, as though the dyes themselves knew the quiet of the land. Even their footsteps seemed to match the rhythm of the seasons, steady and without hurry. In their world, to live in colour was not vanity, but memory. Each hue carried the weight of a story, of labour, of care. A cloak dyed deep red might recall the life of a mother who tended fires in the long night. A stripe of green might hold the scent of wet grass after rain. The act of weaving itself was an offering to time, a way to keep the moment tangible, to make the fleeting visible. Their garments were not decoration, but remembrance of the soil, the air, the hand that shaped each thread. The people of the North did not see color as something apart from life. It was woven into every gesture, every breath. They painted their tools, wrapped colored cords around handles, tied ribbons to their animals' manes. The hues faded quickly in the harsh air, but that fading was part of the beauty. A reminder that nothing endured unchanged, that all brightness softened into quiet in the end. The dyes bled with the rain, the wool grew dull with wear, yet each new cloak would begin again, woven from the same earth, the same patient cycle. To outsiders, these people seemed wild, their colors too bold, their patterns too tangled. Roman travelers wrote of them with fascination and distance, describing cloaks that gleamed like autumn fields or the shifting feathers of birds. But within the tribes themselves, the meaning was simpler. Color was order, the visible harmony between human and earth. To dress in it was to take part in the pattern of the world, to acknowledge its motion and its stillness. The weavers did not seek perfection, they sought balance, the moment when thread, hue, and touch aligned like breath beneath the wind. As they aged, the women passed their knowledge quietly to their daughters. No scrolls recorded it, no monuments bore their names. The learning happened by light of fire, by memory of motion. Fingers guiding fingers, voices murmuring instructions lost to time. The dyes changed from season to season depending on rain, on frost, on what the land allowed. Some years the reds were softer, some years the greens too pale, but always the cloaks emerged, not uniform but alive, each one a reflection of that specific year, that specific sky. When the tribes gathered for festivals, the fields became seas of color. Fires burned low, smoke curling around hundreds of cloaked figures standing shoulder to shoulder. From afar, it seemed as though the earth itself had bloomed for one brief night. Red and green and gold flickering against the grey. Drums echoed across the hills, slow and steady. The colors swayed together in the wind, merging, separating, returning to stillness. It was not celebration in the Roman sense, it was simply a reaffirmation that they were still part of the same breath, that the land had not forgotten them, nor they the land. And when the night ended and the fires went out, the colors faded again into mist. The people returned to their homes, their fields, their quiet routines. Their cloaks, heavy with dew, darkened under the morning sky. Yet even in that dimness, the hues remained, faint but steady, like embers beneath ash. For in their world, to wear color was to remember, and to remember was to live. It was a way of staying visible in a land of fog and distance, of carrying the warmth of the earth across the long grey horizon. Long after the empire's marble had cracked and the roads had turned to dust, fragments of their woven cloth would still be found in the soil, threads of red, of green, of yellow, their colors muted but not gone. They would speak of a people who once carried the palette of the world upon their shoulders, who believed that color was not a matter of luxury or pride, but a quiet form of survival, a language between human and earth, enduring, wordless, and endlessly kind. The women of the tribes. Women of the Celtic lands carried strength in quiet ways. Their beauty was not something displayed or performed, but lived, woven into the texture of their daily existence, like thread spun into cloth. They moved through the world with a calm that seemed older than the trees, their gestures steady, deliberate, patient. Theirs was a strength that did not demand attention. It was the strength of endurance, of tending, mending, gathering, and waiting. Their hair was their first mark of presence. Some left it in its natural shade, deep chestnut, pale gold, or the soft brown of heather bark, while others bleached it with lime until it shone white in the northern light. The lime stiffened it slightly, giving it the texture of straw touched by frost, but they did not mind. It was practical, keeping lice away, preserving cleanliness in long months of labor. When they braided it, the strands caught the faint smell of smoke from the hearth, and when they washed it, the scent of herbs lingered: rosemary, nettle, and crushed mint. Hair, for them, was not vanity, it was ritual. Each comb stroke, each braid, each binding of ribbon or leather thong was a quiet act of order, a way to restore calm after work or storm. Around their necks hung rings of bronze or gold, torques cool against the skin, heavy enough to remind them of their place in the long pattern of life. Some had been passed down through generations, smoothed by time, the metal worn thin where fingers had touched them for centuries. Others were newly forged, shaped in small fires by men who knew the metal's patience. The gleam of the rings was never ostentatious. It caught the light softly, reflecting not pride, but continuity. To wear such a piece was to remember, to feel, even in silence, the presence of those who had come before. Their homes smelled of herbs and smoke. The air was thick with the scents of drying plants, of wool hanging above the hearth, of bread baking slowly on flat stones. The women tended the fire as they tended everything else, not with urgency, but with rhythm. They added logs when needed, stirred the pots, fed animals, fetched water, mended cloth. The motions repeated endlessly, forming a kind of living pattern, a harmony between breath and task. Their days moved with the rhythm of weather and season, the soft hum of bees in summer, the hiss of rain on rooftops in autumn, the sound of wind pushing against the thatch in winter. To them, beauty was not a mask, but a mark of endurance. It came from care, from the way they combed, washed, and adorned themselves, not to attract, but to balance. A woman might wrap a strip of dyed wool around her wrist, not to impress, but to carry the color of summer into the dark months. She might weave small beads into her hair, not for show, but to feel the weight of something lasting as she worked. The reflection of a face in still water was not an invitation to vanity. It was a reminder of presence, of being part of the larger stillness of the world. Their clothing, like their homes, reflected the earth. Wool dyed in muted tones of green, red, and brown, trimmed with patterns that mirrored the motion of rivers and clouds. They wove while the fire crackled, their hands moving with the confidence of memory. The designs they made were not written anywhere, yet each thread knew where to go. It was said among them that to weave was to speak without sound, to bind not only fibers, but thoughts. Their cloaks and garments, when finished, were soft yet strong, carrying the warmth of the hearth and the patience of their craft. Children watched their mothers work, learning not through instruction, but through rhythm. They learned how to twist wool, how to grind herbs into paste for dye, how to tie knots that would not unravel in the wind. Even laughter had its own calm tone, low even, like the murmur of a brook. The women rarely raised their voices, for they knew the world listened better to quiet. In the stillness of their tasks lay a form of prayer, though not one spoken in words. It was a reverence for continuity, for keeping what must be kept, for shaping life gently with one's own hands. When guests came from distant places, they noticed how the women's calm seemed to anchor everything around them. They spoke simply, moved slowly, and carried in their faces the trace of weather. the flush of wind, the softness of rain. Their strength was not the strength of defiance, but of balance. In the long winters, when light was scarce, they lit their homes with oil lamps that burned low and steady. The shadows they cast moved gently across the walls, creating a kind of breathing light that matched the quiet rhythm of their living. At dawn, they stepped outside to gather herbs or hang linen, their cloaks wrapped tight, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The earth beneath their feet was damp, but they walked barefoot when they could, believing it kept them in tune with the world's pulse. They spoke little, but their silence was not emptiness, it was listening. The rustle of wind through grass, the creak of wood, the call of birds. These were part of their language. The line between nature and person did not exist for them. They were continuations of the same thread. In their calm gestures, one can still sense the rhythm of the ancient world, the patience of hands, the steadiness of breath, the slow weaving of meaning into matter. They measured time not by hours or days, but by tasks completed, by the turning of seasons, by the ripening of grain and the cooling of ash. When they combed their hair at night or laid out herbs to dry, they did so with the same attention that built temples elsewhere. Every movement was deliberate, every sound had weight. Long after their voices faded, traces of their world remained. The fragments of talks buried in the soil, the impressions of woven cloth preserved in peat, the scent of herbs sealed in ancient pottery. Archaeologists would later uncover these remnants, describing them as artifacts of a vanished people. Yet in truth, they were not remnants at all, but continuations, quiet testaments to the endurance of care. The women of the tribes had woven more than garments. They had woven time itself, binding the pulse of the world into thread, into memory, into the unbroken rhythm of life. In the hush of the northern air, that rhythm still lingers, soft, patient, eternal, like the whisper of hands brushing against wool, the faint hum of a song sung to no one in particular, and the quiet strength of those who found beauty not in conquest or display, but in the steady act of living. The people by the river. Farther east, among the green slopes and winding valleys of the Balkans, lived the Irian people, a quiet nation shaped by water. Their villages followed the lines of rivers as faithfully as shadows follow the sun. Springs, streams, and deep, still lakes were their measure of time. The sound of running water was constant, low, steady, kind, filling every space between thought and breath. To be born near the river was to belong to its patience, and to live beside it was to learn its calm. Their homes were built from reeds, clay, and willow, their walls cool in summer, warm in winter. Paths curved toward the water, not away from it. The river served as their guide, their mirror, their archive of memory. Children learned to swim before they could walk far. Elders sat upon smooth stones, tracing ripples with their fingers as they spoke of seasons long past. The air smelled of moss and damp wood, of honey and milk, gifts they offered daily to the flow. Women would bring these offerings at dawn, pouring them gently into the current. The honey spread like sunlight on the surface, the milk folded into it like mist. No words were spoken, the gesture itself was prayer enough. Men shaped vessels of clay in the same rhythm, kneeling beside the water with hands darkened by earth. They pressed, turned, and smoothed the clay until it took the shape of the river's own curves. When finished, they placed the pots beneath the current, letting the water fill them slowly, testing their strength. If the vessel held, it was kept. If it cracked, it returned to the mud from which it came. Their craft carried the calm certainty of the stream. Everything useful, nothing wasted. Every act of daily life moved in rhythm with water. The washing of clothes, the grinding of grain, the quiet talk at evening, all began and ended by the banks. At night, fires flickered along the shore, their reflections moving over the current like drifting stars. The people spoke softly, their voices blending with the sound of the water until both became one. They did not hurry, for nothing in their world did. To live among rivers was to understand that all things, joy, grief, labor, and rest, flowed at the same pace. They believed that the river remembered everything it touched. A dropped coin, a fallen branch, a whispered promise, all were carried within its endless motion. It was not feared, nor worshipped. It was simply known. The river was their witness. When someone died, their body was wrapped in woven reeds and carried into the current. The water took them gently, bearing them along bends and shallows, through reeds and stones, until they reached the sea. The people said that the river would hold them until it grew tired, and that the sea, vast, blue, and eternal, would let them rest. In this way, nothing ended sharply. Everything drifted softly into something else. Their resting places were not temples of stone, nor tombs of grandeur. They lay in valleys and near quiet streams, where grass grew long and the air shimmered faintly with mist. Sometimes a carved bowl or a small bronze charm was left beside the flowing water, not as an offering to gods, but as a sign of continuity. They believed the spirit did not rise nor fall. It simply joined the current and kept moving. Death, like life, was a form of motion. Seasons passed, yet the rhythm never changed. Spring brought clear floods, summer brought green stillness, autumn leaves floated like embers upon the surface, and winter froze the edges into glass. Time passed through the Irians like light through shallow water, clear, gentle, unbroken. Children grew and learned the same gestures their ancestors had made, their hands repeating what was never written, only remembered. When travelers came and asked where their gods lived, the Irians pointed to the river. When asked where their history was kept, they pointed again, to the same flowing line, to the same low sound that filled every valley. The wind and the water together formed the music of their world. To live among them was to hear that music always, patient, endless, carrying the weight of centuries without effort, without sorrow, without end. Closing. The long reflection of color. From Rome's golden mirrors to the blue of the northern fields and the pale waters of the Irian valleys, the story unfolds as one long reflection, a soft continuum of light moving through centuries, changing shape but never fading. Each world carried its own glow, its own quiet way of revealing what it cherished most. Rome sought radiance in captured sunlight, turning conquest into ornament, transforming the trophies of war into beauty that shimmered upon the skin. The Celts found calm in the pigments of the earth, wrapping themselves in the colors of moss and flame, weaving the memory of their land into every thread. And farther east, the Irians lived by the brightness of rivers, a light that never burned, only flowed, patient and eternal. None of these lights vanished. They drifted from one age to another, changing form as all beauty must. The gold of Rome dulled into the bronze of time, the blue of the northern hills softened into legend, and the river's light sank deeper into memory. Yet in their quiet transformations, something unbroken remained, the human wish to mirror the world, to capture its essence through color, texture, and care. When one color faded, another rose to replace it. When a fashion dissolved, a new patience took its place. The thread of beauty continued, woven through centuries of silence and change. Across empires and borders, the desire to shape the visible world never disappeared. It only moved more gently, from gold to blue to clear water, from conquest to reflection, from noise to stillness. Now, in the quiet of the present, the echoes of those shades remain, not in palaces nor in temples, but in the small gestures of care that have always defined human life. The comb drawn slowly through hair, the thread pulled with precision through cloth, the hand dipped into cool water at dusk. These are the quiet inheritances of the ancient world, the gestures that outlast empires. The colors of power still exist, but their meaning has changed. They no longer proclaim, they remember. They lie folded within time itself, in the long breath of history, gentle and unending, waiting to be seen again when the world grows silent enough to notice them glowing softly, like light beneath water.